So take it away, Stella.
Good evening, everybody. I hope that you can hear me. I'm just checking as well that the live transcription is also on for those who would like it. And thank you, Mike, for that warm introduction. I'm going to explain a little bit about what the Labour Movement for Europe is, because I'm not entirely sure that everybody understands the inner workings of the Labour movement and all the different variations within it, including those of us within the Labour Party. And then I've been asked this evening to talk a little bit about the work we're doing within the Labour Party on Labour's policy on Europe and how you as party members, or possibly party supporters, might be able to influence that process. So I hope that makes sense to people. We're very happy to take questions. On my right, but I'm not sure if he's on the right on your screens, is Ben Wilson, who is our campaign organiser. I think Moira introduced him earlier. Any questions, please do get in touch with us. We're very happy to talk. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is as far as we are aware, we are the only party political pro-European body within British politics at this point in time. So obviously the European movement is cross-party. I don't believe that the Liberal Democrats or the Greens or the Tories have such a body. Now, that's probably a function because of the way in which the Labour Party is set up. And if you've been a Labour member for as long as I have, you've sat through some very, very dull meetings to go through those processes. But essentially, we are an affiliate organisation and one of the socialist societies, as Mike previously mentioned. What that means in practice is that we have a formal status within the Labour Party's structures. We are the only pro-European organisation explicitly to have that structure. There are a number of other socialist societies. For example, there is the Labour Party Irish Society, there is the Labour Party LGBT Labour, there is the Jewish Labour movement, and alongside our colleagues in the trade union movement, we make up the Labour movement. So we have a formal representation within the bodies of the Labour Party. On the Labour Party National Executive Committee, there are Socialist Society representatives. I know somebody clever on the call is going to ask me how many socialist societies there are. The honest truth is I'm not entirely sure, so I would fail that pub quiz question. I think it's 18. Ben may correct me if I'm wrong. Within that, so we work with those other socialist societies to use those formal platforms that we have to influence Labour Party policy. What does that mean in practice? So we have people who represent the socialist societies on the National Party executive, also on all the regional boards that run the regional Labour Party processes. And then in our own right, as an affiliate body, we can make nominations of people to local Labour Party committees. So some of you on this call who are Labour Party members may well be members of your local general committee. As the Labour Party Movement for Europe, we can also put people onto those local committees and they would have an automatic vote in that process. So that means that we have a substantial role to play within the Labour Party when it comes particularly to this issue about Labour's policy on Europe and what that goes to at both a local, regional and national level. What does that mean in practice? Well, it means over the course of the last year, since I took over as chair last April, Ben joined us in January, we have been working on a number of things. First and foremost, it means we have a formal role in the selection of our candidates. So about a third of all the Labour Party candidates who have been selected now to fight for us at the next election in the seats that have come up are LME endorsed candidates. That means that we have formally selected them through our processes and they come as LME candidates, which means they are there to support the Labour Party, Labour Movement for Europe's policy process. We also have representation because we're affiliated to about 40% of local Labour parties in this country. So on all of those local Labour parties, we have representatives, so people who are members of the LME who are there to be a kind of link and a bridge to us to feedback what's going on in their local Labour parties, which is going to become very important in a minute when I talk about the National Policy Forum, but also to represent our concerns, to be part of our processes. And then we have people on some, but not all, of the regional boards of the Labour Party, depending on other socialist societies and the relationships we have with them in terms of our representation. That means that we have quite a powerful role to play actually in what the Labour Party does, because we can be literally in the room when decisions are made, speaking up for our members and also having a vote on those processes. As you'll have seen, as I say, with the candidates, when we have nominated somebody, that means that they are automatically on the long list to be a candidate. And if we have longlisted them, they are given a very favourable welcoming at shortlisting as well. So an affiliate organisation within the Labour Party has a weight within the Labour Party's decision-making processes. Currently, the Labour Party is going through something called the National Policy Forum, which is the precursor to writing its manifesto. So it's not the actual manifesto, but it is the body of documents about the views of the Labour Party and what it stands for, its policy making, that will form the basis of the Labour Party manifesto. Now, it's fair to say whoever invented this process probably had a bit too much time on their hands, because it is quite a long and convoluted process. Unless you are a member of the National Policy Forum, and again, there's about 200 people who are on that National Policy Forum, you don't need to necessarily worry about that, mainly because we've done the worrying for you, especially if you're interested in Labour's policy on Europe. But in essence, the NPF, those 200 people, are a mix of people who have been voted for by local Labour Party members, representatives of the Parliamentary Labour Party, so a lot of my colleagues are on there, especially members of the Labour front bench, representatives of our trade unions, and crucially, representatives of our socialist societies. So it is a coalition of all the different parts of the Labour movement that come together and agree the documents which are the foundation of the Labour Party manifesto. I'm looking at Ben and hoping that that's the best way to explain it in layman's terms. The organisation of the NPF has been running for some time. They have now agreed 6 documents, which are the basis of the next manifesto. The one that is probably of the most interest to us this evening and in this call and this conversation is one called Britain in the World, which looks at what the Labour Party's general principles and approach to our relationship with the European Union should be in future. It is a draft document at the moment, and members and affiliate organisations and trade unions and constituency Labour parties have been able to submit to the process for writing these documents about the things they would like to see in that National Policy Forum document. As I said, invented by somebody with too much time on their hands. That process closed at the end of April, I want to say. I'm looking at Ben to nod furiously. Yes, it was April. And they are currently now in a process of considering amendments to the documents that have been published. Members of the National Policy Forum will meet in July to approve or reject amendments that have been put forward. So one of the things I would say to you as members of the Labour Party who are interested in what the Labour Party's policy on Europe is to absolutely get involved in that conversation, because although you have now missed the deadline to make an individual submission, you can register your interest in what the Labour Party's policy is in a number of different ways. Firstly, you can find the document on the NPF website. I wouldn't suggest anybody go searching for that website because it is quite difficult to find within the Labour Party hub, but Ben can certainly share the link with you. We can also share with you our own submission to that process. So one of the things that you could do as members is to like that submission and like the work that we have done to develop what we think Labour's policies around Europe should be. And then at the moment, members of Labour parties are invited before the 30th of May, 30th of May, to submit via their local constituency party a 600-word recommendation to the process about what they would like to see in that document. And individual National Policy Forum representatives are receiving representations, and you can find the details of who your local National Policy Forum representatives are on the National Policy Forum website, so it does list their names, are accepting representations about the amendments and the things that they would like to see in the document, having now got a draft document published. I hope that is, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible as a process. The final decisions will be made in July. You have until the end of May to make that submission on behalf of your constituency. And then as an individual member, if you want to lobby individual members of the National Policy Forum, you have basically June to be able to do that. And we have put together a process for our members in the Labour Movement for Europe to be able to take part in both elements of that. That is the process. I'm sure what you want to understand is the elephant in the room is what is it we are suggesting should be in that document. So I would characterise that document at the moment as, and I think Ben's just put it up there for you to see in the chat, so hopefully you can access it, as a statement of intent. So it makes a very clear statement of intent that the Labour Party wants to build a closer relationship with Europe. It also repeats what Keir Starmer has been saying, is that that does not involve being members of the single market or members of the customs union. It talks about some of the things that might be part of that closer relationship. So, for example, a visa system for creative industries people. So it starts to flesh out what that closer relationship might look like. We, as the Labour Movement for Europe, within that process, see our role as to facilitate and move forward that debate. And to particularly, and if you read our NPF document, and I'm sure if any of you have ever suffered from insomnia, you have repeatedly, you will see we have put forward a number of areas where we think it is helpful for the Labour Party to be clear about what a closer relationship looks like, in particular around a more direct relationship with the single market, looking to reduce the paperwork that British businesses face through a customs union and the processes that you can do that, looking at visas and the visa system as a way that we can start to rebuild people's ability to travel to Europe, to be able to work, to study, to do research, and starting to build on those general principles. So we, as the Labour Movement for Europe, have put forward a series of amendments, and amendments is a very general term within this process because it's not entirely clear what is considered an amendment and what is not. There is a separate meeting to decide what is an amendment and what is not. As I say, too many meetings the person invented this came up with. We have put forward 3 particular amendments. One, to say, around that question of what our relationship with the single market and a customs union should be, what our relationship with a visa system should be, and also how this all fits together, particularly around energy and climate change, and some of the things that we could do with Europe on an issue that obviously has a big impact on the cost of living. Now, 3 may not sound very many, but every member of the National Policy Forum can only submit 5 amendments. So you can imagine that's 5 amendments across all 6 of the documents, which cover every single different area of public policy. So it is quite a big deal to get someone who will use any of their 5 amendments at all to support you. I'm pleased to say that we have people who want to support those proposals and wanting to move on and clarify that it's really important for British business that we do get as much direct access to the single market as possible as a priority for the Labour movement. As members of the Labour Party, if those sound like things that you would like to be part of, then absolutely, we have a model motion that you can put forward in your local constituency party. We have some model language to use in writing to the National Policy Forum. And obviously, if you are in touch with your local members of the NPF, the people who've been elected to represent your area, then encouraging them to support those amendments would be a very positive and constructive thing to do within the way in which the Labour Party is making policy. Now, I'm conscious I've probably gone on as long as an NPF meeting would do, and I'll stop there. I'm going to look to Ben because Ben has spent far too much time already, and I promise you we've been feeding him lots of Kit Kats for doing it, looking at these processes and working out how best to help shape and develop that conversation. So Ben, is there anything that I have missed out that you think it's really important at this stage we share with people who are interested in how the Labour Party is making policy on those issues?
I don't think there's anything missed. I think just as you said, the main point is I think the MPF, is a very sort of confusing and mercurial beast. And I think, as I think one of the questions raised, it is tricky to understand. I mean, even when we start the process, how best to engage with it. But I really would encourage everyone that CLPs, all one group, as Stella mentioned, one group of the regional or one group of the representatives are regional reps appointed by CLPs, and it is their job to listen to CLPs and members in their region. So we really would encourage that is sort of the best and most direct way on an individual level, but also as a CLP to engage with the process, sort of alongside, organizations like ours. So though it may seem daunting and impossible to sort of connect with it, I promise there are ways. And, so I would really encourage that. And, I'm happy to go into more detail with anyone if they get in touch. And because I know it's, I could speak on this for an hour about all the technicalities, but I doubt anyone wants to hear that. But so, yeah, I just really wanted to reinforce those points because I think that's sort of the main area, particularly for members to be aware of.
What I would also say, thank you, Ben, and thank you for the amount of time you've already spent looking at this, is it's a very open question to us how this process affects the manifesto, but you have to be in it to win it. So I'm afraid I'm looking at this on my iPad, so I can't quite see the chat questions. And I can see bits and pieces of them, and I can see people wanting to talk about that policy process. This is the policy process that the Labour Party is using. I am hopeful and excited that we may well get a Labour government within the next 18 months. So they'll be there for the trade and cooperation agreement renegotiation. That is an absolutely critical time for those of us who want to tackle the impact that Brexit has had. And we are very clear in the Labour Movement for Europe that you can't make Brexit work. You can only solve the problems it's created. We're also very clear that there is a limited window of opportunity. So the British businesses who are giving up trading now and giving up on trading with the 500 million consumers on our doorstep need us to be very focused on what we can achieve in the next 18 months, 2 years, because otherwise it may well be too late for them. The industries where people are starting to be retrained in Belgium or Germany or Italy, I was talking to people in the creative industries, and they're seeing a lot of those jobs starting to move overseas anyway. So even if we take too long to negotiate those potentially creative visas, then it's just too late for them. They need us to be really, really targeted about what we can do now. None of that precludes what may come later. But at this point in time, in particular, in winning arguments with the Labour Party about what we can do, winning answers to the British public, I am very clear that focusing on the needs of British business and British workers is absolutely where we need to be. And so as the Labour Movement for Europe, we are trying to facilitate that debate within the Labour Party. I should, of course, also say, if you're not already a member of the Labour Movement for Europe, and you want to know more about being a member and having that more formal role within the Labour Party, so, for example, being your general committee representative or taking part in our selections and choosing candidates to represent the Labour Party in the next election, you are very welcome, because that also helps show to the Labour Party that there is an interest in this issue. I think Mike would probably agree, and Emma would probably agree, getting people to talk about Brexit at the moment is still quite hard work, because everyone has been so scarred. And I've just spent 4.5 hours in a debate with Bill Cash and Danny Kruger on the EU retained law bill. So I can tell you it is an incredibly draining experience trying still to talk about these things, but it is really, really important, because we haven't got a moment to lose in trying to help those people who are at the sharp end of all of this. I'm going to stop there, Moira. I hope that makes sense. I'm sorry if it's too technical, but please do ask us questions. We're really keen to hear from you, and obviously keen to work with you, because I think we all want to see that change and people have a hopeful debate about what can be done to rebuild our relationship with the European Union.
Thank you very much, Stella, Mike and Ben, for all of your contributions. And agree, Stella, I think it's fantastic that we're working together so closely on this. Just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat function. We've had a few so far, but I think we can do with a couple more. So if you'd like to know the answer to a question, particularly if you're a woman, because no woman so far has asked a question directly, I think it would be brilliant if you could ask your questions. So we're going to kick off with Owen Gardner's question, which is around rural Labour Party members. How can we ensure that pro-EU rural Labour Party members can be encouraged to engage with the MPF when they feel a little bit disassociated from it as a process?
Shall I take questions in groups of 3? That makes most sense. We encourage people to get as much. We'd really love to hear your questions. So I can see there's groups of them if people want to.
Yeah, there are a
ask them
couple
in groups
more.
of 3.
So I'll ask Owen's supplementary question then, which is around the boundary review and the CLP review coming in a couple of months. If your CLP is about to disappear, how can people engage when they're already not engaging because of that process? And then I think I will take then take Peter Packham's question, which is it your position that a Labour government will be nice to the EU and then let us cherry pick the bits we want? So if we can go,
I was just
Stella,
writing
Ben
it down.
and Mike. So if you want to kick off Stella,
Yeah, sure.
we'll bring in Ben and Mike.
So Owen, I feel and I hear your pain about the boundary review and the impact that it has on people's willingness to participate. For those of you who haven't had to deal with this, we are now in the point where people's constituencies are being shifted around, and absolutely that creates a sense of dislocation for people. The formal NPF process takes place up until July. My understanding is that the boundary changes wouldn't go through until September, so you would still be in your old constituency in terms of whether you chose to table the model motion, for example, or you chose to write on behalf of your constituency. In terms of rural seats, absolutely. So one of the revelations, I think, for a lot of the MPs who might consider themselves to be pro-Brexit has been the response of the National Farmers Union to some of the things that the government has tried to do. And we've met with them a number of times, particularly over things like the retained EU law bill, because the last thing they need is to rip up every single regulation that has given them predictability. Some of the trade deals they're absolutely horrified by because it's about undercutting them. So I think there's a very strong case to be making there, not just about what this government is doing, but also why it matters to have that close relationship with Europe, and particularly issues around alignment. So a lot of the things about European standards, one of the things that we put in our document, for example, is that we should have a default that says that we're going to align with the European Union. So you know if a new regulation is going to come in, unless there's a very good reason why we wouldn't, businesses can be confident that the UK is going to align with the EU, so it's not going to create extra challenges for them. Also, we think we should start with the creative industries and young people and researchers, but we don't think we should limit ourselves to recognising the problems that are coming with visas. And we've seen that particularly in the agricultural industry, and working out how you can resolve that within a visa system. The British public, I think, on the whole, are supportive of people who have work. And actually, that's a debate that's really moved on in the last 4 or 5 years. So for an agricultural and rural communities that are seeing firsthand the impact of Brexit, whether it is in the impact, particularly the red tape that our farmers are facing, some of the things that they've done the deal on with Australia make your hair stand on end in terms of food standards. If you listen to the debate today, you will have heard Jacob Rees-Mogg bemoaning the fact that we're not bringing back chlorinated chicken. So I think that there's a very strong argument that we can make with our rural communities about the impact on British manufacturing and farming that has come. And indeed, in our NPF document, we've got a reference to it and the work that we want to do to support British farmers. Practical terms for you and your constituency, I would say that if you can still meet one last time, perhaps in May or June, there is still merit in bringing forward something and encouraging people on a personal basis. Owen, we'd love to work with you in the Labour Movement for Europe to support you if you're moving into a new constituency, and not losing your energy and interest in these issues, and supporting you in coming together, because there isn't a moment to lose. Because obviously, once we've got through the National Policy Forum process, there is a Labour Party conference and all the fun that comes through the Labour Party conference as well. I know, too many meetings. Peter, you asked about Labour's, but absolutely, I'm very clear we can't cherry pick. Actually, what we need to do for Europe is not be this government as a basic point. That means going beyond not just saying, well, are you friend or foe about the French, but actually being clear about what we do want. We spend a lot of our time talking to people in the European Union, and absolutely just the chaos and conflict they've had from this Conservative government. We are a breath of fresh air, the Labour movement. You can see that already they feel they could work with a Labour government. But they also need to understand where we want to get to. And that's why we're proposing amendments to this document to set out more clearly what that road of travel might look like, and being clear that we do want to secure access to the single market. And so we want to look at what that might entail. I hear people talk about cherry picking, and absolutely it's only by being clear what we do and don't want to do and where those boundaries are that we can avoid that accusation, because otherwise it does look like we're saying we want it all to be one-way traffic. We have to have that conversation. But one of the things I would ask you to bear in mind is that for the last 13 years, possibly even more, actually, if we're honest, the European Union has been used to hostility from the UK, and they've been used to a very aggressive approach to working with the European Union. Well, actually, the next Labour government has an opportunity to reset that and be deal makers, not deal breakers. So be trusted, but also clear about what we want to achieve, and open to where there is common benefit. There is common benefit in trade. There is common benefit in reducing those barriers to trade and reducing the amount of paperwork that people have to deal with. That conversation is one we want to lead within the Labour Party. I'll give you a good example of it. We want us to look at the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention. That rolls off your tongue after a couple of gins. That is something that's broader than the European Union, but it's a good example of something that we could be supporting to reduce the paperwork that British businesses are facing. We have to be in those negotiations. We have to be trusted that if we do want that, we would deliver that, but we also have to be clear about that being something we want to achieve. And I hope that gives you an example of the sort of thing that wouldn't be cherry picking, because there are benefits to both sides in those conversations, but would be a new conversation to have about our relationship with Europe. I'll stop there, possibly hand over to Mike, I guess.
Okay, hi. I will be relatively brief on this, because the main purpose tonight is to for you guys to be engaging with Stella. With and I'll pick you up on the rural labour stuff, because to follow on from what Stella was saying, rural issues, rural dynamics actually really changing quite rapidly. And I know that within Labour, Luke Pollard and Daniel Zeichner, who are responsible for farming, get it. I know Daniel particularly well. They engage also a lot with the National Farmers Union. I know Minette Batters as well. There was a time when she was sucking up to Boris Johnson quite heavily, even though she was communicating to others, you know, her alarm at all of this. I think we've gone through a break point now, and the NFU are just deeply angry with the current government, and unthinkably, they are actually looking towards Labour and Lib Dems more for sensible policies. Now, the Lib Dems have been slow to engage in farming and rural issues. I think they should be moving on it faster, given that the rural and semi-rural was their base. But they got in touch with me when they were having by-elections and saying, you were right, you know, the farming stuff, you know, it's really cutting through. And I think for both Lib Dems and Labour, there's a lot to pick at here. So for the Labour members in those rural seats, issues around our own traditional farming, our own local rural businesses, the environment, the air and the water quality, and you know, the guarantees that you would have thought, they're all evaporating away. So I think there's a lot to be gained by bludgeoning the Conservatives on being completely unconservative and conserving exactly nothing within the rural space. Peter, on to cherry picking. I wonder, given that you use that phrase, if you also listened to the Power Test by Aisha and Sam Friedman when they talked with Anand Menon and also Stella, because Anand, always sharp, pointed out that the EU was going to be very reluctant to allow the UK to be cherry picking, even if it's a Labour government saying we're nicer than the previous ones. That was Anand's line. I think actually what Rishi Sunak has demonstrated is that a little bit more diplomacy than what Boris Johnson showed actually goes a long way in being able to seal deals. And I also think that should you be able to pick just one or two cherries, I don't think the EU is going to hand over the lot, but I think if you can demonstrate one or two, and then the EU see a UK government trumpeting them effectively and warmly at home, then you actually help get the country moving in a direction of travel that is very much aligned with what the European movement would like to see. Remember, our policy is step by step to rejoin. We should not be shunning steps wholesale, but rather embracing them in order to set a momentum. So much as I think you're right about cherry picking wholesale, I think a little bit of gain. So those would be my responses to those two questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. Would you like to add anything, Ben?
I think they've covered them pretty extensively. The only thing I'd say very quickly to own about the rural stuff is it is actually something that a number of MPF reps have raised with me, and I can just purely anecdotally, but I can say it is something they're raising and are pushing for. So I hope that gives some hope and confidence there.
Thank you so much, Ben. So we'll move on to the next three questions. Yvonne has asked, she said that some people who are on the left politically, including Labour Party members and who are pro-European, have felt a little bit disheartened about the Make Brexit Work rhetoric coming out of Labour. And are you able to encourage us that a Labour government would be positive about our future relationship with Europe, and how are we able to communicate this? And there's a similar question that's come from Paul, but with a slightly different take, which is, what can pro-Europeans do to press Keir Starmer to stop ruling out certain closer relationships with the EU, including joining the single market and the customs union and restoring freedom of movement? And then we have a third question saying that the referendum was clearly worded around the EU, but that's not the same as the single market. And why don't we talk about that more? Because there's no mandate to leave the single market. So I think I'll bring in Mike, then Stella, then Ben, if that's all right. Mike, would you like to go?
I just thought that I was muted. Right, was making notes busily. Second one was about Keir's. Third one was about single market. The first one, again, that was about Labour policy as a whole and the future direction. How can you flag it up as being more pro-European rather than just making Brexit work, right? Okay.
So yeah, so the first one was about the Make Brexit Work rhetoric.
Yeah, so Make Brexit Work is interesting because there's two sides to that coin. Make Brexit Work may sound like it's bunkering in Brexit harder, but then Make Brexit Work as, if you think about some of the things that Stella has proposed, that is retaining Brexit, but easing the relation. So is that making Brexit work, or is that starting to dig out of Brexit and build back to the EU? So I think within making Brexit work, you can actually be building back to the EU, but the labeling sounds pro-Brexit. So for me, it's an odd one, because the pragmatics could be setting a more European direction, but the rhetoric seems to be actually reinforcing Brexit and strengthening it and buttressing it. So I think that the language of Make Brexit Work is actually damaging, because I think what we want to be saying is not doubling down on Brexit, but rather ameliorating Brexit to make the UK work. If you were to fiddle around with the language, you have to, I think, in the phrase, acknowledge that what you're actually doing is making the UK work and making the current situation work, and part of doing that is actually negating some of the detriments of Boris Johnson's deal. So I do think Make Brexit Work, you know, a three-word slogan, just because we all think that three-word slogans are good ever since the Vote Leave campaign. I personally think that needs to be looked at, and we need to find another alternative, or I think Labour needs to find, and if Lib Dems go much more pro-European, Labour's going to have to play catch up quickly, I think. I think Labour needs to try and ease in, alongside Make Brexit Work, another framing that can then take over and actually set more of a direction, which is not bunkering in, but rather moving away from the pit. On the second issue with regard to Keir Starmer, I don't particularly have any interest in trying to convince Keir Starmer at the moment. I understand what his mission is. He just wants to win the next election, and he wants to win the next election by whatever is most secure and whatever works. And at the moment, if he can neutralize the Brexit issue and go hard on Tories are bad, they've broken the fabric of this country, we need to repair the fabric of this country, that's what he needs to do to get in power. That is his priority. I know that, I understand that, I respect that. The only thing that I would ask, and this you know, is that probably for his own sake, but also the country's sake, he does not paint red lines too hard and make it too difficult to adapt according to the circumstances when and if he gets into power. Now, obviously, if he needs the Lib Dems when he comes in, then everything that's in the manifesto has to sort of be reworked again in the light of what Lib Dem demands are. But if he does get in with an outright majority, then if he's painted himself into a corner, which then slows the ability of the government to actually do what's right by the country and what the country wants, then he will have overdone it at this stage. And that's the only thing that I think needs to be, well, there are two things that need to be impressed upon Keir at the moment, and that is stop the Tory crazy like the retained EU law bill and the ECHR, which destroy his platform to have options in the future. Make sure you take that out. And the other one is don't paint yourself into corners. So thirdly, when it comes to the single market, again, I would just frame that within the context of the second, which is don't take away your options now. Look at the polls, do what work you can with your northern Labour to Conservative switchers. Don't just listen to them. Think about how you can also nudge them away from the Tories on some of these issues so that you have more freedom of movement, pun intended, going forward.
Thank you, Mike. I'll bring Stella in now.
Where is your mute button, Stella? Where have you put it?
Would you like me to bring Ben in for a second while you find your mute button? Ben, do you want to come in very quickly? And then we'll bring Stella in.
Oh,
There we go. Sorry, it's because I'm on an iPad, so it's really difficult to get it to turn up all the time. Actually, I mean, I kind of want to take on, I see Colin's question in the chat as well, Yvonne's question, Paul and David, all very similar points, which is how political parties' policy is made. We are very clear in Labour for Europe, and I've been saying for some time, we don't think you can make Brexit work. So one of the things that as the Labour for Europe we're doing is moving that debate on and saying, look, you can't make it work. What we need to do is decide what we're going to do about it now. And I would say actually that probably puts us ahead not only of where the Labour leadership is right now on those things, but also the Liberal Democrats, because I noticed that the Liberal Democrats are not calling for rejoin. They're not calling particularly for membership of the single market at this point in time. So as a movement, as an organisation, looking at what that would look like in terms of how you get direct access, the first thing I would say, and Colin, you say, what's the point of the Labour Movement for Europe, is be in the room. These conversations are very live internally within the Labour movement. They might not be live publicly because so much else is being talked about. Cost of living crisis, war in Ukraine, post-pandemic, issues around infrastructure and energy crisis. It's understandable that Brexit in itself has become squeezed. We are also doing a lot of work right now to identify how Brexit is having an impact on British business, having an impact on British workers, to show that you can't really solve. So one of the things that the Labour Party says right now is that it wants to look for the fastest growth in the G7. Now, absolutely, you can do that outside of having a relationship with the single market, but it's a hell of a lot easier to achieve if you do have a strong and close access relationship with the single market. So one of the things that we're doing is trying to tie those things together. You can't do that from the outside. You can shout from the outside, or you can be in the room challenging, putting those things forward. If you care about these things, as an affiliate, we have a formal role. There is no other organisation, no other process for doing that within the Labour Party. And I promise you, these things do have an impact and they do matter. And that kind of goes to Paul's argument about stripping things out. But one of the reasons we're proposing amendments, we're not trying to rewrite the whole document. We are trying to move that debate forward and be clear about what a kind of open understanding of what a closer relationship with Europe could look like should be at this point in time. Of course, policy is going to develop as we get closer to the a general election, which is probably going to be sometime like this next year, probably even later in the year. So one of the things I would say to all of you is, if you are Labour Party members, there isn't really another way in a democratic organisation. One of the reasons why there are so many of these meetings, it's quite slow moving, is because we are a democratic organisation, but you have power as a member in that process. And we as an affiliate have power within that process. So by combining our efforts, we can have even greater power together. Now, see, I would say that, but I think we are having an impact, because a year ago, nobody was even talking about this stuff. We are now getting people to talk. The work that we've done on selecting candidates, and I can see somebody wants to stand in Sevenoaks, we've opened that process up. So you can stand to be selected to be endorsed by the Labour Movement for Europe, because in every single constituency where there is a selection, we are holding hustings. And if you follow us on social media, you can see when those hustings are going to be. And if you're a member of the LME, you can take part. We are mimicking the democratic process of the Labour Party in doing that. David, the reason why we're doing that is what you're talking about when you say about the timing for the NPF motion. It is a very short window. I don't think that's necessarily about stopping people. I just think that's where they've got to in their processes. But that's why we've created materials for our members to be able to use. And again, if you're a member of a local Labour Party, we'll happily share with you that model motion to get that in. We think it also counts as an emergency motion because of the short time period. So we think you can argue that with your constituency secretary if there's any problem, but that means that you can have an impact in that process. Yvonne, I should be clear, I'm a backbench Labour MP. I'm the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. So my role is both to lead and to listen. So I am trying to facilitate that debate and be that bridge, which is why we're keen for people to work with us and be part of what we're doing, but also why it's not just about what I say. You as a member have power within the Labour Movement, but only if you choose to use it. And that is about being in the room. It is about working with people, finding those points. The NPF process is a classic case in point in that. But we wouldn't be coming to you asking for your help and support for the amendments that we are proposing. And I can see people have raised other points. Some of those issues are already in the document. So this is just about adding into the document rather than rewriting it as a whole. We think that would be a productive thing to do. We don't waste anybody's time in the Labour Movement for Europe, least of all our own. So if it is something that you care about, I would encourage you to be part of that, because in that process, you are showing the Labour Movement that this is what our grassroots members want to talk about in the first place. And that helped move things forward too. And I'm sure Moira would agree, as a local councillor, it's people coming to your meetings, it's people speaking up that help shift those debates. And they may not move at the pace that you want to, but they do move.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I say to lots of people when they ask why politics is in the state it's in is that, well, just voting every few years isn't enough. Actually, the best thing you can do is join a political party and get involved in its internal democracy. So it's great we're doing this today. And would you like to come in and say anything that we haven't already said?
I think it's all been covered on those points. I don't think I could add anything on them, but thank you.
No problem. Thank you. We've only got about 7 minutes left. I know we're getting on a bit, so I'm going to ask 4 questions and group some of them together and ask them very briefly just to round out. So the first question I'm going to ask, we've already talked about someone who wants to stand as PPC for Sevenoaks, and best of luck. But the question is about the support that pro-European organisations, LME and the European Movement, will be able to give during the next general election. Another about whether you can be an EU citizen living in the UK and contribute to the Labour Party's debate. We've had a lot of questions about freedom of movement, which I'm going to boil down to how likely it is that we can get a freedom of movement-esque policy in the Labour Party manifesto, what that would look like and on what terms. And then the final question that I'm going to ask is from Owain again, and it's very close to my heart, and it is that Labour does have a lot of women members in non-metropolitan areas, and in my experience they are often the people who set the political tone of their communities, and they unofficially get the vote out, and they are instrumental in quite an undiscussed way in the places that we want to win. And how do we target them? So I will bring in Stella and then Ben and then Mike.
Brilliant. Okay, so pro-European organisations at the general election, I imagine actually this is where we would take over from the European movement, because you are cross-party, and so you will be in a position where you want to maintain your cross-party capacity. We obviously are only going to support Labour candidates and work with Labour candidates. We are already working with those candidates who we have nominated through the process, who are Labour LME candidates endorsed, to organise campaigning sessions and to support them. If you would like to do that to make sure that the next cohort of Labour MPs are pro-Europeans, please do get involved with us, and we can tell you details of the canvassing sessions that we are doing. I don't know whether the European movement, you will do hustings and things like that, but in terms of actual campaigning and actual support for campaigning, we will be organising a lot of that, because that's another thing that we can do on a partisan basis. And that's what's great about this, is that, you know, there are some things the European movement can do, and there's some things only the Labour Movement for Europe can do. An EU citizen is very welcome to join the Labour Party, very welcome to join the Labour Movement for Europe. We can share details with you about how to do that, Jan, Peter. I think it would probably be a question of where you're living, but we can certainly help you connect up with your local Labour Party. The visa scheme, I mean, as I say, look, there are big questions which would take a long time to resolve, like things like rejoin, like things like, you know, I mean, if you talk to the Ukrainians, that's 10 years, 7 years of it's being fast-tracked. And then there are questions of things that we can sort out in that window where there is still an opportunity to save that industry or save that type of work. And I saw someone mentioned Erasmus as well. I mean, that feels to me, again, another issue where we've got to try and save our universities and save that opportunity. We already have a visa system. It's just hopeless. It doesn't work. We've been tracking the numbers of people getting criminal records for overstaying on their visas. Obviously, the pandemic has slightly affected some of that. So we think there is a very productive conversation to have with the European Union about that visa system in of itself. We think it should go broader than just the creative industries, because those issues about travelling for work are affecting a number of different sectors. And that's where we're pitching the work we're doing in the National Policy Forum right now. I think one of the issues is to start showing people that it's possible to do these negotiations. And I understand Peter's point about cherry picking. Actually, for me, the visa system is such a distinct thing that offers an opportunity to look at those issues and look at where it's not working for both sides. It doesn't preclude anything else. It's just about, oh, so I appear to be making thumbs up. I promise you I'm not. Goodness knows what's going on with my system. And Owen, you ask a question very much at the heart for me as the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, and a lot of the work that I do. There is a very sobering piece of research that shows that women were as alienated by the Remain campaign as they were by the Leave campaign. Women's voices, the diversity and plurality of women's voices, were not heard in that debate, full stop. Some of us argue that they're not heard as equally as they could be in a number of spaces in British politics, and we're trying to do things to change that. I would say to you, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, watch this space for some of the stuff that we've got planned with the Labour Movement for Europe on this issue. But absolutely, it's one of the reasons why we have requirements in terms of our candidates and the candidates that we will support, because although the Labour Party is no longer able to use all women shortlists, we as an affiliate organisation can set our own rules. It's why we have rules in our meetings about participation, and it's why we have issues around the people that we have representing us. That is about the leadership, but you can't do that just at the leadership. You also have to do that at the grassroots. And there are definitely some things that we've got coming up in a couple of weeks' time that may well be of interest to you, and particularly when it comes to changing that conversation about, for women, what it means to have a closer relationship with the European Union. I will stop there, but Ben, if you can put the link to the Labour Movement for Europe in the chat so people can find us, because I fully appreciate that not a lot of people necessarily know about us. And can I just say thank you to the European Movement for offering us this opportunity to look at how we might be able to work together and where there is collaboration to be made, because in this debate, the most important thing is that we all keep talking.
Thank you so much, Stella. Ben, would you like to come in, and then I'll bring in Mike?
I won't speak to the questions. I'm very conscious of time and want to give Mike the final word. But all I would say is, for the people whose questions weren't answered or who have more questions or want to find out more, please feel very free to get in touch. I will be on the other end of the emails and very, very happy to answer and discuss anything and everything with you. So yeah, that's all I'd say to the people whose questions weren't answered. And I'll hand over to Mike to finish up.
Right. So yeah, it's been a fascinating session, brief, but there will be more. I will answer the questions, then I'll give a little sort of wrap up from my end. With regard to European movement during a general election, we are still in the process of forming up a business plan for how we behave during a general election, and that is something that I'm going to be tasking largely to the National Council. As Stella says, there is a degree of, when a national election comes along, European movement, because it is cross-party and comprised of lots of very active people from different political parties, one of the things that we have to do is let those people go off and campaign how they want to locally, and ensure that that doesn't cause us any problems, that they can scatter fairly and engage in what they want to engage in, and not use European movement systems to push anything that is, you know, party political and going to cause ruptures for us long term. But on the other hand, I think there will also be opportunities during such a period for us to be engaging with people in ways that we find to be productive and that doesn't cause you know, cross-party grief. But yes, that is sort of being shaped up at the moment in order to kind of like de-risk how we work going through that phase. But also there are certain activities that we can do which we believe are, you know, going to be very productive overall. With regard to EU citizens in the UK, absolutely they should be getting involved. I know Brexit felt very much like a real boot in the guts to lots of our fellow Europeans in the UK, and for many of them they felt that that delegitimized them from having a voice and having a say and being involved in communities like they were before, because they weren't welcome, they weren't included. Certainly in European movement UK, and I'm sure this goes for Labour movement for Europe as well, in our communities you are more than welcome. You are encouraged to get involved. We will wrap our arms around you. You have given love to our country and we will give love back. In fact, I would actively encourage you to join so that we have this community here for you. And I'm sure the same would go in LME, because, you know, the spirit and the intent there, I know to be the same. With regard to issues of free movement, Starmer is not being helpful. I'll be blunt about that. Saying free movement is a red line is not a useful framing of it. I think that when we're talking about free movement, there is an issue of immigration, but there is also, and this is where the pivot should be, there is an issue of rights and opportunities, and looking to safeguard and guarantee rights and opportunities of our own citizens, as well as of fellow Europeans with whom we wish to engage. And so instead of saying, I draw a red line at free movement, wouldn't it be nicer to say, we live and work in Europe, we have to have better relations there. We know there's a whole load of snarl up with travel and work going both ways. Surely we can have a look at this and build sensible frameworks that are mutual, that are respectful and beneficial to everyone. And I think putting it in frames like that, which is positive and door opening rather than door slamming, is what I would like to see happen. And then finally, with regard to female members in rural areas, I want to go wider than that. I think diversity is a major issue that we need to be addressing in European movement and probably in Labour movement for Europe as well. If we want to build think about rejoining 65% of the population stably saying, yes, we want to rejoin, it can't be based on white, middle class, predominantly males alone. It just can't. We need to understand all of the communities of this country, not just pick people who have, you know, the right color or the right background, but actually know the communities, know what those communities want, and get their champions working alongside our champions to weave that fabric of a future vision that we all want. Diversity is absolutely key for everyone's future. So finally, to wrap up, first point of order, I have to correct Stella on something, which is there are actually pro-European parts of other political parties. Within the Lib Dems, there's the Lib Dem European group. Within the Green Party, there's the EU liaison group, which is all about pro-European policy, and it pushes that. And also within the Conservatives, there is the Conservative European Forum, chaired by David Liddington, and that incidentally is starting to grow and get more active. So there are things bubbling away everywhere, and we from European Movement want to bring to the fore all of them and help strengthen all of them and work with all of them. And then finally, to wrap up, I regard tonight's session as just a first step, a baby step, a sort of getting to know, sort of like drinks without the drinks kind of thing. But as we go forward, and this is likely to be a long journey, this isn't it, and this isn't the end of it. This is the beginning of working together, working better. And so all of you here, I hope to ensure that you have ongoing access to Stella and Ben and Labour Movement for Europe, and feel sort of welcome in their company as you feel welcome in our company, because those channels of communication and camaraderie are really, really fundamental. And so that's what we look to continue building. So thank you very much for coming along tonight. You pioneers, you.
Can I just check? I was very helpful to hear, because we have met with the Conservative Group for Europe, but they're not a formal part of the Labour. I mean, one thing I would say is, as an affiliate, we do have a formal status within the decision-making processes of the Labour Party. I'm not aware of any other political party having that sort of structure, that formality to it, but it does mean, for example, with things like the National Policy Forum, what we do and what we put forward through the social societies process has a formal status in the policy-making process. I don't know, and one of the things that great maybe the European Movement could do is to put us in touch with the other organisations, whether they have that formality, because it means that when you become a member of the Labour Movement for Europe, you are supporting our role within that affiliate process. And that just, it sounds very techie, but it's incredibly important, because it means we can be in the room in a way that no other organisation talking about Europe can be within the Labour Party. But it's very specific to how the Labour Party is structured and the Labour movement. I don't know if that's the same with the others.
Understood. I just felt the need to represent.
No, that's great. I mean, that's good, because we've not had any contact with them apart from the Conservative group who we were trying to work with on the retained EU law bill. But it does mean for your members here tonight, if they're not members of the LME, or if they want to be part of those formal processes and have that status, that is a very powerful thing within the Labour Party, and that's why we can have the influence that we can have if people want to work with us.
Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you for that clarification, Stella, and thank you for those rousing words as well, Mike. And also thank you, Ben, for the instrumental role you've had in organising this evening. And thank you to all of you for your excellent questions and your very vibrant discussion on the chat. So let's go out there and let's influence Labour policy. Thank you all again, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.